What's up, everybody? I got Phil here. We're going to dive into a deal that he bought as part of our deal segment here and dissect the good, the bad, and maybe the fun stuff. I think we have a couple fun things to talk about on this one.
Asterisk next to fun.
Yeah. Fun's relative. I'm using that pretty loosely here. But let's start with just the property itself, the real estate. Can you describe the size, the market, any physical attributes you feel are relevant, and then we'll get into the story of the deal.
Yeah, absolutely. So I purchased a 20-unit apartment building between 4 roofs, 3 6-units, and then a 2-family, all on, I think, technically 2 lots, earlier in 2026.
Got it. And this is, year built, it was an 80s build, right? Yep. Yeah, so somewhat newer. Which
newer for us up here, 1980s. Original windows, which was one of the things, or mostly original windows to the 80s, but the owner had done a number of upgrades to probably about 3/4 of those units.
Okay. So kind of like a light value add at the end of the day.
Yep.
How did you find it?
This was an on MLS deal. I was sitting out there with a broker who I thought, did an okay job marketing it. I think that there could have been a couple other things, but it intrigued me mostly because I had, the down payment funds from about 4 other cash out refis that I did in mid 2025. So I'd been sitting on this cash for about 6 months looking for a deal, had seen this and didn't really love it. I believe the seller had initially listed it like 4.6 or 4.7 and then made a price reduction down to 4.4.
Got it. And that leads us right into the next question. What price did you pay, and was there anything kind of around the price that maybe, sweetened the deal?
I think one of the things being a real estate investor, being beneficial to a real estate investor is having your license, that if there are on-market opportunities out there that fit your criteria, you can broker your own deals.
Yeah.
And I took a commission on it and then also negotiated a credit at closing from the seller that made it to a point where I was buying it at about $215 a door, $212.5, $215 a door.
Got it. How did you fund this whole thing? How'd you capitalize it?
Great question. So there was about 4 or so units in that building that were vacant at the time that I had submitted the offer. The appraiser went in, had gone in, and because of those 4 units, I believe he ended up putting a 5% loss to lease into the underwriting.
So you just kind of went a little bananas there.
Little bananas here. And I had a little hiccup with the financing that the bank was only willing to lend me $3 million, which was about, I want to say, 65 to 70% LTV.
This is like a local banker?
Local bank, yep. And they essentially lended it off of the cash flow hitting 1.2 DSCR, and that ended up equating to about $3 million. I had about $1.1 million and needed a spread of $300,000, and ended up just working with a little hard money guy that was willing to give me some short-term funds to close that gap.
Got it. Yeah, it sounds like a typical story of an appraiser hijacking a deal a little bit, which happens. This is going to be the real nuance, but I think this is what people might find valuable. We don't have to name names or anything like that, but was this a local appraiser or like kind of a, New Hampshire appraiser? Or was this like a large regional appraiser from like a large institution?
Large institution based out of Boston that I thought had done.
Yeah. Usually that means you wouldn't run into a snag like that. Usually the story goes small, older guy, lived in this town for 40 years, can't believe stuff is this much, and is chronically under. Yeah. But that's interesting. But nevertheless, it's a good solution there, like small short-term funding. Business plan. What do you? I know you're in the process of kind of working through a business plan on it, but like when you closed, what was the business plan? Has that changed at all as you started executing it?
Yeah. So the building needs a little bit of capex. There's some leaky roofs, exteriors that need some love. So I'm in the process of completing all of that stuff right now. At time of purchase, rents were, let's call it on average, it was being marketed as $1,600, where I had figured that I could get somewhere right around $2,100 to $2,000. I had turned over units and got, increases on the existing tenants. Markets ended up dictating when I started advertising the property about $1,950. So I just went in and offered every tenant that same dollar amount that I was on market renting these 2-bedroom, 1-bath, garden-style units in Plastow for, and everybody jumped on it, right?
There
like,
you
I
go.
think it's a pretty good market, rental there, and the 2 duplexes getting a little bit higher, which helped me out. But so far, I had turned over the 4 vacant units with very, very light, turnover. The owner was willing to have his maintenance guy at the time kind of touch them up, get them ready for me. So day 1, I had a photographer in there and was starting to market those properties. Since, I've only had about maybe 2 or 3 tenants that have left. One that needs a full turnover, which for me is new flooring, countertops, cabinets, and bathroom stuff. So that's kind of where I'm at, and now in the process of actually trying to take out that hard money guy and engaged another bank to do a new loan on it based off of the new rent rolls.
Gotcha. I love it. We touched on a couple of these, and maybe it's repetitive, but what went better than expected post-closing? What do you think went worse than expected?
I think the better for sure was the amount of people that had ended up renewing.
Yeah.
I think one of the things when you're buying from a lot of these like single owners that have owned a property for 20, 30 years, that create relationships with tenants and hear I can't pay my car bill this month, I'm going to be 3 months behind. They may be getting a story from the tenant. Not saying that that's necessarily the case, but I think that happens a fair amount.
Yep.
So the previous owner had kind of, told me that he expected a lot of people to leave, and so far that just hasn't been the case.
I think that there's a misconception for a lot of folks where they don't think that tenants know the rental market. Tenants know the rental market. Their cousin just moved in down the street. Their friend just moved in the town over. Their niece just rented an apartment. Like, even if they're not actively looking themselves, they kind of just hear about what's going on. And everybody loves to get on Zillow and scroll around on a Tuesday night when they're watching the Red Sox game.
Definitely.
So it's like people do have a sense, and I'm hijacking this conversation a little bit, but like in all of our buildings where we buy these garden style buildings, like the 45, or 45 in Manchester, we bought a 72 unit in Barrington, New Hampshire, which is, very similar, kind of fundamentally similar town to like a Plastel, like median income, median rents. And we thought a lot of the folks were going to leave, but the renewals are so high. When you're at like, 1,600 in this example, maybe you can get a little over 2,000 if you were to release, but you're $100 below that, maybe a little bit more below that. And the unit itself is in good shape, solid shape, maybe only needs like 7-10 grand if you turned it over. A lot of those folks are going to be like, yeah, you know what? I'd rather just stay and pay $1,900 here than $2,000 at the place down the street with slightly nicer countertops, because I don't want to feel like moving and I like this area and whatever.
Right. And they have to go pay their friends to help them move or hire a mover. And that there's always a cost to that. So I think that's one of the biggest things to kind of also take away for, real estate investors is people do want to stay unless it's, ungodly, like of an increase. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And I think that's the big thing is like a lot of people will consciously make the decision to pay like that 1,900 versus the 2,000 if they're getting like if the fundamentals are the same. If there's a dishwasher in their unit and a washer dryer or whatever, I'm just using examples, like a dishwasher and a washer dryer in their unit, and they're going to move to a place that has a dishwasher and a washer dryer, but like the flooring is a little bit nicer and the counters are granite instead of premium laminate. To a lot of people, that's not worth $100. Right. To some people it is, but to a lot of people, it might not be. Let's talk about what went worse than expected, or maybe your biggest lesson or kind of takeaway from this one. I know there's a couple things that that you might talk about here.
Yeah, good lesson that was, everyone kind of drills into you if you work with a mentor, but to verify. And if I could be a mentor to somebody else right now that's listening, that's a little bit younger, getting started, is verify. Yeah. I had received rent rolls from the seller that average rents were right around $1,650. But as the first month of my ownership came up and door loop, notifications hit tenants, they said, "Why is my rent $200 or $250 a month more? You didn't give me a notice." And I had to go back and have them verify that their previous month was, $1,495 or $1,450.
Yeah.
Out of the gate, it was a little shocking.
Oof.
Right?
Yeah.
But I knew that I had already gone through, 4 or so units within the community that had already turned over and rented from being vacant, that I knew that I was going to be able to get qualified tenants coming in. Mm-hmm. So I knew that I was just like a 2 to 3 months that I would have to suck it up. Yeah. A lot of those people went from that, let's call it $1,450, $1,495 to $1,950 without kind of a blink of the eye.
Yeah.
So unfortunate at the beginning, worked out just okay. And I think that's another thing is like I always look at what could potentially go wrong, and in this case I didn't look hard enough, but changing a little bit of the mindset to what could go right at the end of the day, it was pretty helpful.
Yeah, and it's tough. I mean, I guess in this situation, was it like just a rent roll that you got with like no estoppels or anything like that? That kind of yeah. And I think what's interesting though is like somebody listening might be like, well, that's why you get estoppels, and it's like I'll be the first to say, dude, like in the mom and pop world of real estate, in the 5 to 30 units, whatever, with the guy who's owned it for 20 years, like if you ask for estoppels from every tenant, like he's probably just going to tell you to pound sand.
Yeah, and he did.
Yeah, exactly.
I had an attorney helping me, and we were trying to get him to do this, and it was like, are we going to close or not? And I knew that I could float for so long that if something did happen, which ultimately did end up happening, it was all okay at the end of the day.
It's the perfect encapsulation of the idea that like in these small deals there's more inefficiency and more variance and more distress, and for all that you can get a really good deal, but with that comes you have to operate in a little bit more uncertainty than the nice pretty 150 unit building with very sophisticated seller, buyer, brokers, and lender. It's like it's just a bit of a different asset, right? So that's my 2 cents, because boy have I been burned on the same exact situation like dozens of times. Right. Like we're under contract on a deal right now where the tenant found our information while we're under contract as the buyer, and she's like, hey, the seller signed my name on this lease that I don't have a lease, and my rent's this, and the seller gave us a lease at a higher rent that she forged the tenant's signature on to make it look legit. It happens. And like that's an extreme version, but like that's happened a bunch. Like and it's, you kind of just get used to that variance when you're playing in this space. I mean, it's a deal that you still own, but like question I have is like, what was the end result, or maybe in this situation, like what is the end objective on this one? It seems like it's a refinance and you're close to that.
Yeah, so looking to just refi the existing debt right now, which shouldn't be a problem, and to get that hard money guy out, and then probably hopefully within 12 to 24 months look to do another cash out, pull out, if I typically my game plan is if I can pull out 75 or more % of the money that I put into it, I'm very happy. And then just being a single investor, not having investors that I have to pay or execute a full business plan with, once I pull that money out, I'm kind of just let it ride. In some of my portfolio, that's what I've done.
Yep. Just out of my own curiosity, you mentioned that there was a duplex as part of this one. Is that like something that you would like sell to maybe like an owner occupant, or would you want to hold on to that? Or
potentially at this point, no. Yep. I'm getting $2,500 for each of those units, which is pretty solid for a 2-bedroom duplex. But it is definitely something that if I needed cash in the future, that I could quickly, in this market, could quickly sell and go redeploy somewhere else, I would.
Yep, makes sense. Cool, man. Well, for everybody listening, your show, I'm going to include your contact info in the show notes. If for some reason you're listening to this episode, but you didn't listen to the episode on Tuesday, like go back and listen to that episode. But thanks again for the time, man.
Awesome.
It's been
Thanks,
great.
Axel. Appreciate it.